Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all staying healthy and happy as you can be wherever you are. I know it's a stressful time right now, so I just wanted to share this picture of a sloth with you to hopefully cheer you up a little bit. For today, we're going to be going over the 4G grammar content for our chapter. So we are going over the future perfect, finally. We got our last tense. So we've learned all of the other tenses so far, and future perfect is the last one. So the future perfect is between the future and the present on our timeline. So the present over here is where we are now. The future is in the future. And the future perfect is between those two. So it's an action that is completed from the future but has not yet been completed from where we are now. So the way we translate that is in the active, it's I will have whatever. So I will have loved you in the future, or in the passive, I will have been blanked. So I will have been loved in the future, but I am not yet loved now. But I will have been loved before I will, eat my sandwich in the future. So active, I will have blanked. Passive, I will have been blanked. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is go over the passive tense because I think it follows the pattern a little bit more easily and you'll be able to follow it more clearly. So the passive voice for the future perfect is as follows. So because it's a future tense, it has future endings, but it also has perfect endings because it's the perfect tense. So to have the perfect passive, you always need to take that fourth principal part. So amatus aum or amati ia in the plural, and then you're going to add the future of sum after that. So you get amatus aum and then ero, which is I will be, eris, erit, erimis, eritis, and then erunt for they will be. So it follows a very similar pattern to the regular future of sum, as you can see, and also a similar pattern to the regular perfect passive forms, which would be amatus aum, sum, ss, sumus estis sunt. But here you have the future. Instead of sum, you have ero. Okay, same thing holds true for the deponents. They look just like the perfect passive. So we have minatus aum and then ero, eris, erit, erimis, eritis, erunt. Just what you would expect. Deponent and passive look identical in form, but the deponent, remember, is active in meaning. So this means I will have threatened as opposed to I will have been threatened, which would be passive. Okay, so the future perfect active is very similar. So you take that third principal part because that's the perfect active form for any given verb. So we have amawi, so we take off the I and we get amaw with that V or U right in the middle. And then you add the same future of sum. So you have ero, eris, erit, erimis, eritis. And then here, instead of erunt, because amawerunt would be your third plural perfect form, we want the future perfect form, so you have to change erunt to erint. So you add an I here. So it's actually a little bit more regular than the forms are generally. So you have I, as opposed to a U here in the form of sum that we had for the passive and deponent. So you have erint instead of erunt. Otherwise, very similar. You just tack on those endings to amawa, that third principal part. Okay, so that's all the information you need to do the assignment for Wednesday. You're just doing your exercises, practicing with the forms. So on page 210, you'll be doing exercises 1 and 4. So you're just using those future perfect forms, making sure you're comfortable with them. If you have any questions, let me know. For the rest of this video, I'm going to be talking about different types of sentences and how to use them, and that will be for your homework for Friday. So do watch the video just to make sure you have the content available to you, but watch it more thoroughly for Friday when you have to actually use it to do exercises. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is conditionals. So Latin uses conditionals fairly frequently, And the way they turn out in English is they're the sort of sentence that's if blah, 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 then blah, blah, blah. So if I want cake, I will take it from the freezer. Or if you go to the party with me, then we will have a great time. That sort of thing. So there's a condition involved. And the way to do a condition in Latin is you have the word si, si, and that's the word if. So the first one we're going to talk about today is the future less vivid condition, as shown here. So the future less vivid is something that happens in the future, but it's probably not going to happen in reality. So the way we translate it in English is if this should happen, this other thing would happen, with the understanding that it's unlikely that the first thing will happen, and therefore the second thing is also unlikely to happen. For instance, today it's very cloudy and the forecast says snow, so I could say, if it should be sunny this afternoon, I would go for a bike ride, but since it's unlikely to be sunny this afternoon, I probably will not go for a bike ride. So it's some sort of less vivid condition and therefore an unlikely condition. So to express this idea of an unlikely condition in Latin, you use si, if, plus a present subjunctive, and then in the other part of the sentence, you also use a present subjunctive. So the first present subjunctive corresponds to the should, and the second present subjunctive corresponds to the would. So if it should rain, I would pack an umbrella, but it's unlikely to rain, so I will not pack an umbrella. That sort of meaning is the future less vivid conditional, and it uses two present subjunctives. Alright, the next type of condition for today is the present contrary to fact condition. So this is kind of similar. It's something that's not actually happening, but this one's taking place in present time, versus the one we just saw was taking place in the future, something that would happen. So in this case, we have if something were happening right now, this other thing would be happening right now, but the first thing is not happening, that's why it's contrary to fact, so the second thing is therefore not happening. For instance, if I say, if I were practicing my Irish step dancing right now, I would be playing very loud music, but obviously I'm not practicing my Irish step dancing right now because I'm making this video. So it is a contrary to fact condition. It's something that's not actually happening, but we can talk about it in this vague other universe where it was happening. So the way to express were and would be in Latin is with si, our if word, and then an imperfect subjunctive here and an imperfect subjunctive here. So the future less vivid was a present subjunctive and a present subjunctive, and then the present contrary to fact is an imperfect subjunctive and an imperfect subjunctive. So future less vivid, two present subjunctives, present contrary to fact, two imperfect subjunctives. One more important detail about conditionals is that a couple things change with the grammar. So if you have si, meaning if, or nisi, meaning the negative of si, so if not, and you have a form of aliquis, which remember we learned means someone or something or anyone or anything, what happens is you get rid of this ali, so you just have si quis. So if you want to say if anyone, you use si or nisi and then quis instead of aliquis, which you would use in a normal sentence. So the mnemonic for this is si, nisi, num, and ne, all the alis go away. So that's si, nisi, num, and ne. You get rid of that ali and you just have a form of quis, but it still means that idea of someone or something. So if anyone would go to the park, you would just have si quis as opposed to si aliquis. So just something to keep in mind. Alright, so the next thing we're going to talk about is another little detail for the subjunctive. So here we are. The subjunctive in relative clause. So all of the relative clauses we've learned so far have had the indicative in them, so you have qui, quai, quad, and then some indicative verb, and that's fine. That's what most of them are. But sometimes you have a subjunctive, and you kind of have to figure out why it's a subjunctive, because that's a little bit weird. So you can have a general or character clause for the relative. So in this case, you would be describing a sort of person as opposed to a specific person. So if you wanted to say, like, Caesar, who is of the sort who leads an army, you could use the subjunctive in that relative clause, as opposed to Caesar, who was at that time leading an army. So the characteristic could be Caesar, who was of the sort that leads an army, was engaging in politics at the moment. So he's not actually leading an army, but he's that character, or that's a general idea about him, not necessarily what he's doing at the time. The second thing is you can have a causal relative clause. So this is a relative clause that kind of explains something. So if I say, I hate you, you, the person who killed my sibling, that would be causal, because you're actually expressing, I hate you because you killed my sibling, but here you're using relative clause to do it, so you're using a qui, quae, quod in Latin. You can also have a concessive clause, so perhaps you want to say, I love you, although you killed my sibling. In that case, it would be concessive, because I love you who killed my sibling is a little bit unusual, and therefore you can determine it's concessive, because although they killed your sibling, you still love them, and therefore you're conceding the fact that they killed your sibling. Okay, the next thing to discuss is cum and quavis. So cum takes the subjunctive, as we know. We learned it with the pluperfect subjunctive, but as we've seen a couple times already, it can also take the present or imperfect subjunctive. So present, imperfect, and pluperfect could all go with cum, meaning when. It can also mean although or since, depending on the context of the sentence, so you can kind of just judge what's best in translation. Quamvis, however, always means although. So it always sets up some sort of alternative to the actual situation. So although this is happening, this other thing is still happening. So some sort of opposition there. And it can take any tense of the subjunctive. So just know cum can take a subjunctive clause, and now quamvis can also do that. Okay, the next place subjunctives show up is in reported speech. So reported speech is just a fancy name for indirect statement, usually a very long indirect statement. So if you have a verb like dixit, he said, and then a couple paragraphs of indirect statement, it's called reported speech because it's very long. So most of the verbs in indirect statement, as you know, go into the infinitive, but if you have any subordinate clauses, they go into the subjunctive. So if you have a relative clause in a sentence, for instance, and then you put it into reported speech, so it's no longer in its normal non-reported speech, the relative clause goes into the subjunctive there, because it's not part of the main sentence, so it can't go into the infinitive. Same thing happens if you have like a because clause. He went to the store because he was hungry. He went to the store would turn into the infinitive because it's the main part of the sentence, but the because he was hungry goes into the subjunctive because it's a subordinate clause. You could also have, if you have ubi meaning when, so when he went to the store, he bought some bread. The when he went to the store goes into the subjunctive, but the he bought some bread is the main part of the sentence, so that goes into the infinitive. So just any subordinate clause in your sentence goes into the subjunctive in reported speech, with a couple minor exceptions, but for the most part, that's the main rule. Alright, the very last part of this chapter is something you probably noticed while reading your 4G text, but I'm just going to go over it so that you know in general what is happening. So, esse often gets dropped in indirect statement if it's clear from context what's going on. So one example from the text we read for today is we have audiret civis Romanos percussos. So he heard the Roman citizens beaten, but there should actually be an esse here that's just missing from the text because it would take too long to write out. It's like we drop things in English all the time. So he heard that the Roman citizens were beaten. So it's really an infinitive, perfect passive infinitive here, but the esse is just left out for convenience because you would be able to tell what's going on anyway without it. Okay, so that's the last detail for today. So hopefully you feel comfortable with all this material. If not, again, please always let me know. Ask me any questions you have. Only the first part of this video is important for Wednesday, and then the second half will be relevant for Friday when you start translating sentences. So I hope you all have a great Monday, and I will see you soon.